This episode of Inside the Goblin Universe brought to you by SeatsLink.com, the complete ticket experience. Use promo code GOBLINS with your purchase. SeatsLink.com.
This is Ken Gerhard, and you're listening to Inside the Goblin Universe.
Hello again, Goblins, and welcome to another edition of Inside the Goblin Universe. This is actually our first ever, very special episode, our Halloween episode. I am one of your hosts. My name is Ronald Murphy.
I'm the other host, Bryan Bowden.
That's right. That's right.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Absolutely. Now, the guest that we have on tonight, I have been a huge fan of his for quite some time. And whenever I wrote my book on werewolves, entitled "On Dogman: Tracking the Werewolf Through History," he was the first person I thought of to write the foreword for the book. I sent him out the manuscript, and he was very kind to respond and wrote me up a great little foreword for that book. He was very generous to me with research, and like I said, I've been looking forward to talking to him since we had our show for quite some time, but he's a busy guy as well. But without further ado, Mr. Ken Gerhard, thank you very much, sir, for being on the show.
Well, thank you, Ronald, and Bryan, thank you for having me on. It's definitely an honor to be here tonight, and looking forward to having a good discussion about, I guess, goblin-like matters.
That's right. Cryptozoology. Cryptozoology is the field.
Cryptozoology,
yes.
Yeah, sure. The Goblin Universe, yep.
Now, is your favorite holiday Halloween, Ken?
Oh, yeah, of course.
That's right.
It isn't. I mean, even people who say they prefer Christmas, I think deep down inside, they really think, you gotta love Halloween. I mean, people, of course, love to be scared, and we love to play dress up, and it kind of, creates that shadowy veil of a fantasy world and things that go bump in the night. It's a great time.
That's right. Now thinking back, can you remember what your very first Halloween costume was?
Well, I remember my mother made me my mother was an incredible costume maker. She worked for local theaters and did costumes for Shakespearean plays and stuff. That was one of her great gifts, was costuming, and she made me, when I was a young kid, a really awesome creature from the Black Lagoon costume.
Oh, wow.
Made from scratch. It was cloth, but she basically sewed all the little muscles and gills and things in, so it looked very realistic. And it had, I remember the frill, or the, what do you call it on top? I guess we'd call it a frill. It was kind of made out of a shower curtain, so it kind of had shiny.
Man.
Yeah, so that was the first one I ever remember, was that I even have a picture somewhere of my little creature. And, of course, that's very fitting because I love the creature from the Black Lagoon, wonderful movie, and also it's a cryptid. So
yes,
that's right. That's right.
I remember that coming on. You seeing some of the old movies. This is how I started as well. The Lon Chaney, Bela Lugosi. I mean, you can't beat that stuff. That was just incredible, especially the creature. Oh.
And you know what? The reason I brought up about your childhood, would you say that your childhood, Ken, really kind of formed who you are today in relation to the crypto world?
Well, it was, looking back, I think it was a culmination of different events, epiphanies, if you will. I was born on Friday the 13th of October.
That's
nice.
So I was born close to Halloween on a Friday the 13th. I was born a week before the Patterson film was shot, the famous Bigfoot footage. Growing up, of course, I was really into, my father was a forestry professor. I loved animals, the outdoors, but also my whole family loved Halloween and horror movies and all that. So we had awesome parties and, watched a lot of horror movies as a kid and monster movies, and so all of that stuff. And as I got older, I got the opportunity to travel a lot with my mother, and I saw some really cool things around the world, a lot of mysterious places around the world, Loch Ness, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, places like that. So, it's just kind of a lot of things that kind of all came together, and I guess they did mold me in some way.
Excellent. Yeah. And you take this very seriously, don't you? I mean, even now you work with the San Antonio Zoo. Is that correct?
I do. And, cryptozoology, the name cryptozoology, of course, hidden animals. So cryptozoology was founded by actual zoologists and was intended to work within the providence of scientific standards and methodologies and zoology. And so it is really about animals, or hopefully about animals, although I guess the word has evolved through the years, and now it encompasses other things that are a little bit more paranormal or whatever. But so I think having a strong foundation or knowledge of the animal kingdom in all aspects, there's so much to know in terms of taxonomy, phylogeny, animal behavior, evolution, and the fossil history, new discoveries. All of that, I'm finding is relevant to the search for hidden animals.
That's right. So in relation to hidden animals, one of my favorites, of course, is the idea of a werewolf, an intelligent type of sentient being, something that transforms, whatever have you. But throughout history, there are hints about these kind of creatures existing. And that's something that's fascinated me for quite some time. And I think one of the best programs ever filmed was your werewolf documentary that you had done. And you talked about the Beast of Bowden, which is one of the most interesting cases, I think, in the history of cryptozoology. And it's one of the most overlooked as well.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, it is an iconic mystery, and particularly when I was in France, France has, this is their big mystery. This is their Bigfoot, their Loch Ness, their, what have you. But I had, of course, heard of the case, but having the opportunity to go to France and investigate it was certainly a dream come true. For your listeners who aren't familiar, the Beast of Gévaudan is a region, or was a region in southern France, one of the more remote regions of southern France, kind of mountainous. It was known, or it's now known as the Auvergne region. But long time ago, 1764, when the killing started, specifically June 30th, 1764, a young woman named Jean Boulet was killed by an unknown beast, and that was the start of a killing spree that lasted about 3 years. And anywhere from 60 to 120 people may have been killed by this beast that was described as a wolf-like animal, but much larger, the size of a calf, with a large head and a muzzle, small straight ears, large fangs, hind limbs possibly longer than forelimbs, or vice versa, sharp claws, perhaps even hooves, and a long tail with a tuft of fur on the end. And it was described as being kind of a reddish color with a black stripe down its back. So not quite a wolf. But yeah, what was really crazy is that this thing ran in France for 3 years and was killing and attacking all these people in really heinous ways. I mean, most of the deaths which were documented were described as these people being devoured or decapitated or having their limbs torn off or disemboweled. Really grisly stuff. Excuse me. And interestingly enough, most of the killings or most of the attacks really were on either women or young people who were typically out tending to small herds of cattle or other livestock in on the edge of the woods. At that time period, people were very poor. The men usually had worked hard labor all day, and then the wives and the children would have to work too in terms of watching the livestock or doing different things. So, and even crazier than that is the fact that this rampaging beast, did not even attack any of the livestock that was around. It only went for humans, which is pretty crazy. But after this 3-year killing spree, a strange animal was finally shot on June 19, 1767, by a local hunter named Jean Chastel. He was richly rewarded for his heroic act, and according to the stories, the remains of the animal were paraded around the countryside to put people's minds at ease, and then ultimately taken to the palace of King Louis XV, who had been dispatching soldiers and professional wolf hunters for 3 years, trying to quell the panic. But the remains of this mysterious beast have been buried in an undisclosed location, as always. Seems
that's right.
And Yeah, so yeah, that's the mystery of the Beast of Gévaudan. There was a movie called Brotherhood of the Wolf. A lot of people have seen that, and they often, when I start describing the story, they're like, "Oh yeah, it's just like that movie." Yep, that's the movie. It's the same story.
That's right. Yeah, it's a great, interesting story, and it actually has historical context. I mean, we're not fooling around here. We're talking about King Louis himself, and that's what's so interesting. This actually gripped the nation of France to the point that the king was employing forces and paying out money for this stuff to hunt something that was very, very seriously taken. This was something that was killing. This was threatening the populace. And if we would think of the world at the time, this was a world in rapid change. Revolution was in the air. Washington was fighting in the French and Indian War at this time, and it's just a little bit off before the Bastille will be stormed. So, this is a very volatile time, and a lot of people, think that, hey, this might have been something that was stirred up. It was a creation. This might have been something to take your mind off of the political intrigue that was going on. But I don't see it that way. I mean, all the research that I've done into this particular event seems indeed as if something was preying upon the people and the margins of life because it was easy to hide and attack and fall back and everything. The question is what that thing was.
Yes, that is the question. And as you indicated, there are elements of people look at the story and the time period and the fact that there was a feeling of unrest among the populace. These were very poor people. They were starving. It was a very brutal winter time. They had a disdain for King Louis. There were a lot of elements involving the Roman Catholic Church versus Protestants. I mean, yeah, there was a lot of crazy stuff going on, and there are people that think that there was perhaps a conspiracy. There have been allegations that there may have been a serial killer involved, a human, perpetrating some of the attacks or training an animal to attack. So many different layers to this story, like all great mysteries.
That's right.
They did mention something. I mean, if you look up this, they're talking about mastiffs being used, or some of the armies that they did employ dogs to do some of their bidding. But one of them was like a red mastiff, and I don't think I've ever seen her. I mean, I've known animals and dogs for years, and I don't think I've ever seen or ever come across something like a red mastiff. But given the fact that all this is going on, I'm liking it. I'm intrigued by the whole serial killer aspect of it, because it is a really weird time back then. Lots going on, lots of confusion, and for these individuals to prey on people at that time would be perfect setting for them.
Right. But we do have eyewitness accounts of people that actually survived an attack, like Ken had mentioned, and they're seeing something strange. I mean, these are people that are closely tied to the land. Wolf attacks were very common at this time as well, too. So these are people that are agricultural people that know what live out in the woods, and they have no idea what's attacking them. They have no idea what's going on. People have suggested a hyena. Is it possible, Ken, that there could have been a relic of some sort of Pleistocene wolf going on, or whenever the Who's are described? Could it have been possibly some sort of Ice Age wild hog or something? I mean, what may have been going on there?
Well, the more romantic theories involve really old carnivores known as mesonychids. There was one called Andrew Sarkis that lived, I believe it was during the Oligocene epoch, so 55, 60 million years ago, and they basically were the predecessors to modern dogs and bears, and they had the characteristics of both. So that would have been a really far-out possibility, as well as the dire wolves that you mentioned from the Pleistocene epoch, or as I briefly mentioned during the episode, cave hyenas. There were species of prehistoric hyenas native to all of Europe during the Ice Age, and they were huge, much larger than modern hyenas, and probably very vicious. But all of those are very problematic theories when you consider there's only one. There can't be one remaining member of a species that is thousands or millions of years old. That doesn't make sense. There has to be a population. The other thing that I wanted to go back to and revisit was the fact that there were so many attacks, I mean, yes, it's true, wolf attacks were common in those days and so forth, but the fact that there were so many attacks, and again, going back to the zoology and cryptozoology, it doesn't make sense from a biological standpoint, because there is no animal that would basically be killing somebody a day, one person a day, and eating them. I mean, sometimes there were 2 attacks reported in one day, hours apart. So it just doesn't seem like one animal could be responsible for all the attacks and the killings, that maybe there were other elements.
What about the whole wolf, the wolf pack theory, where you have a few of them, and each one takes their turn, trying to get a kill. This is a very, very strange case. If I had a time machine, I'd love to go back to this point to see what's going on, because there's so many different theories going on, and if you take modern animals or the evolution of what is now would be a wolf or a coyote, or they are opportunistic, and they will go after something smaller. It's just surprised that they wouldn't go after a larger piece of meat, like some of the sheep that they were herding, or calves, and just to go specifically for humans.
Yeah,
that's you have to have a taste for that.
Animal's going to go for the easiest form of prey.
Right.
Something like half of a wolf's diet is field mice. They're going to go after an attack and kill little time. Why risk injury attacking a human every time? So.
That's right. And there are a lot of reports. Yep. I'm sorry, Ken. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I just realized that I think I stated the Oligocene epoch was 50. It was about 35 million years ago. So it was still, not quite as long, but still pretty long time.
Pretty long time ago. That's right. But as I was going to say, that you've actually clarified it even more. That whenever people did encounter this creature, there were reports of them trying to fight it off. So this was not an easy thing for this predator to overtake a person. It knew that it was in for a fight, and it really makes no logical sense why it would just target a human being. There's none whatsoever, unless it was an animal known to science that was trained for such a thing. That's another possibility. Of course, Jean Chastel, they said that he may have owned a menagerie, and within that menagerie he might have had some hyenas, and there's even some notion that he might have been the one behind all these killings, and he was actually able to take the animal out because he knew the habituation of the animal, so it would be easy for him to find it and then appear the hero. Or is it possible that Jean Chastel himself was the werewolf?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, that's a good theory right there. He's a shape-shifting werewolf.
There are some kind of cool supernatural aspects to the case too. There were several examples where the beast was confronted by soldiers or people with guns, and it was said to be impervious to bullet. Would take several bullets and would just run away as if unfazed. There's one account of the beast crossing a stream on its hind legs, walking bipedally. So I mean, for those out there, the listeners out there that like to follow the exploits of the quote unquote Dogman or Dogmen, I guess you could say this could potentially be an early version of that phenomenon.
That's atypical characteristics of the current modern Dogman phase that's going on right now, especially with the bullets. But and you have to understand something. These shells and what they were firing at them are significantly larger than the bullets that we have today. So it's going to it's almost like a shotgun going at you versus like a point on an end of a round. One of the theories that we discussed, because I do investigate Dogman, is that the skin, we talked to a couple of moose hunters up near Canada, and the problem with moose and with Dogman is the skin or the hide is so thick and tight that it is like a bulletproof vest for these creatures. So I'm interested in seeing what other areas had like this type of creature, werewolf or Dogman-esque type of creature. Is there any in a certain area in France or neighboring countries that have experienced the same Dogman or type attacks around the same time?
Nothing really solid. I remember when I was researching for the show, there was a similar creature was reported from eastern France. I think a century before, but I don't remember the name. And then you have a lot of course, werewolf stories from Eastern and Western Europe. around that time period, but maybe a little earlier, mostly 18th century and before.
Right.
But no, this is a landmark case. I mean, it's really hard to put anything, to stack up anything against it when you consider the number of victims involved. I mean, I literally, one of the most poignant moments of my investigation was standing in the graveyard of a dozen victims of the beast. And there, you're actually, it kind of brought it home when you actually saw the tombstones and realized that all of these people allegedly had fallen victim to this creature, whatever it was. So
we're talking about it on a Halloween episode, but like you said, if you would go back, several hundred years, we're talking about, people that were, brothers and sisters and husbands and wives that were being slain by something completely unknown, which is one of the reasons why I think that this case is so worthy of study. It needs to be continually studied by, anybody that thinks calls themselves a cryptozoologist or even science for that nature. I mean, there should actually be a zoologist looking at this case because we may have indeed been dealing with some sort of relic animal.
Yeah, well, we may never know until unless someone ever locates the grave, which I guess is unlikely at this point.
Yeah,
I'm sure that's written down someplace. One of the things that pops in also is and we've talked about this before in the show, some of the royal paintings that you would see from the 1800s, 17th, 16th, of some of these royals that are suffering from the porphyria, I think it's the disease.
Hypertrichosis.
Hypertrichosis.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them do look like your atypical werewolf, or Eddie Munster from the Munster family. And if you do have a disease of this nature, it's maybe a byproduct of this is, I'm going to talk about insanity for the most part, where you do go on these killing sprees, and maybe that's why the king got involved in it, because it can definitely go back to them if they find out a royal is killing people versus some mystical wolf.
Yeah, that's true. And I know the hypertrichosis thing probably has been brought up a lot, and it probably does explain some aspect of werewolf legends worldwide. But my understanding is that hypertrichosis is exceptionally rare in 200 million people or something like that.
Right.
So I mean, back then there probably would have been hard pressed to find 200 million people around the world. So those cases are probably pretty rare, and a small part of the component of the mystery.
But talking about serial killers, though, and serial killers and the idea of werewolves, in the mid 16th century, we have the werewolf of Bedburg, Germany, and Peter Stumpf, who actually believed he was a werewolf, and he went around killing these things. So it's quite possible that these people also were witnessing somebody that was a serial killer, possibly dressed in the skins of an animal like a berserker would, and kind of covering his tracks and going about business, because, we're talking just a few hundred years ago, and the people then were exactly the same that they are today. So the chance of somebody going a little bit off kilter and starting to kill people is extremely possible.
Yeah, absolutely, that could happen. I mean, to me, the scariest animal on the planet is man.
Absolutely,
100%.
That's right. Whenever I'm in the woods, I'm not afraid of a Bigfoot or a Dogman. I'm afraid of some other person encountering me in the woods. That's my biggest fear whenever I'm out there investigating. Yeah. Now, what is your favorite cryptid there, Ken? Like, if you could go right now and investigate anything, where would you be and what would you be investigating?
Oh, that's so tough. People ask me that all the time, but it's like choosing your favorite child,
I can do that.
I can do that too right now.
Yeah,
I'm not a parent, so maybe that's not as hard as I think it is.
It's not.
Depends what the day is.
All the books will tell you it's very difficult. Yeah, all the books will tell you that's an impossibility, but I will tell you instantly it is not.
Oh, man. Well, I'm known for my research into flying cryptids. I guess the thunderbirds, the reports and sightings of monstrous airplane-sized birds over North America, perhaps related to Native American mythologies. Those are pretty fascinating to me. I love all the classics, the Loch Ness Monster and the Yeti. I like the Almasty, which of course is the kind of Mongolian or Russian Yeti, which is described as more human-like, like maybe a Neanderthal type thing. The giant moa is kind of a cool one. Have been sightings and accounts of these giant terrestrial birds in New Zealand. There was a species that was about 12 feet tall that was eradicated supposedly back in the 1600s. So these were birds that were very similar to like emus or ostriches, but much larger. And the Tasmanian tiger or thylacine, the notion that you have this relict population of carnivorous marsupials running around Tasmania and parts of Australia. They supposedly went extinct in the 1930s, but there are so many sightings and accounts of those. I think that would be a real boon to cryptozoology to find something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you which cryptid do you think has more of a chance to be shown to be flesh and blood than any other? Like, if you were to make a prediction, say, in the next 10 years, this animal will be known to science, which one would you pick?
If I was going to rank them, I'd probably go ivory-billed woodpecker 1, and I don't know if people would really accept that as a cryptid, but that's to me that is a valid cryptid. Tasmanian tiger, thylacine 2. Maybe like something like a sea serpent 3rd. I mean, there's a lot of new things are being discovered in the ocean all the time, of course. You have average depth of 12,000 feet, and it covers 71% of the planet, so there have got to be things down there we haven't seen yet, and you have centuries of reports of these giant serpentine animals. They're probably not big snakes. They're probably mammals or something. The orang pendek, or little man of Sumatra, which some of my colleagues have investigated. It's basically like a Littlefoot type creature that's been reported from the jungle there. And that area has yielded, Southeast Asia, Indonesia has yielded a lot of new animal species over the past decade. So I think those are some of the more likely ones. And, I'm about 90% convinced that Bigfoot, Sasquatch exists. I've not seen one with my own eyes, but I've been investigating them for many years, and I've looked at a lot of evidence and interviewed a lot of witnesses, and I'm fairly convinced that they exist, and it's got to just be a matter of time before somebody finds some remains or gets that elusive good photography that we're waiting for.
Yeah, right.
I find it interesting that you all these cryptids that you mentioned come from vast areas. So, Australia is such a large continent that, and it's relatively unexplored to what it needs to be. The rainforests over in Southeast Asia are just a bastion of, you don't know what's in there. So I kind of tend to agree with you on that. One of the things I noticed also that through the Fukushima and the radiation, the poisoning of the waters, we are actually seeing a lot of creatures being washed upon the shore that we've never seen before. And what I love is, the first thing the go-to is, that's a whale. That's a sperm whale that's been, eaten. I'm not a doctor of veterinary medicine, or, I'm a cryptozoologist to a degree, but scientifically, not everything's going to be a whale. And this radiation's reaching depths that are going to kill everything. So I think we're going to probably see more things coming from the water or the ocean first before the land.
Yeah, potentially. That seems to be the pattern. More things being found down there right at the moment anyway. So.
Yeah. What about the megalodon? What are your feelings upon that sucker?
Unlikely, in my opinion, that something like that could still be around, and there wouldn't be more attacks or more sightings. I mean, I know a lot of people love that show that they made for Animal Planet, and surprisingly, at the San Antonio Zoo, I was doing a shark presentation months ago, and we did a thing called Ocean Day, and people were coming up to me. I had a megalodon tooth on my table, and I was talking about sharks, and people kept coming up to me and saying, "Oh yeah, I saw that footage. They're real. They've got the footage." And I didn't want to be a joy kill or anything. But, that show was fabricated, and the sightings are few and far between. If you delve into cryptozoological literature, there really are no substantiated. There's like a really old sighting from 1900 with or alleged sighting, I should say. Yeah, Megalodon, if he was, unless it adapted to be a really deep ocean feeder, but, the assumption is that Megalodon was related to great whites and, maybe other types of mako sharks or things like that. And in that scenario, it would have been a kind of a coastal dweller, and not super shallow water, but you know what I mean. I mean, they would have been seen offshore.
I do, yeah.
They would have attacked more people or whatever.
Right.
So
that's right. It would be attacking yachts, probably.
Yeah. One last comment. It's amazing how many people want Megalodon to still be around. Oh yeah, I saw his story. I was like, why would you want something like that?
That is just ginormous.
Those people live in Nebraska. That's the reason.
Yeah, I guess that's it. Yeah, they never get down to the beach.
That's exactly. I know I would not. But I mean, what is fascinating though is early man may indeed have shared space with these creatures at one time, and of course
sure.
I study the idea of the cryptid from a very archetypical point of view, from a psychological point of view, and what kind of impact this may have left on the mindset of humanity and how it has evolved throughout time. But whenever we think about all these great things, you can tell that early man had experienced something that was so utterly impactful on the psyche that we keep on reinventing it with each generation, because it really means something to us as human beings. And the idea that something is out there that large, capable of feeding upon us or feeding upon the prey that we were after at one point, that is something that's startling. And I think that really does. I think that we should look at things from a psychological point of view, because even if they're not flesh and blood alive with us today, if we go back far enough, we can find out that they did indeed have some sort of impact on who we are as human beings, in the 21st century.
Yeah, fascinating point. I totally agree.
Well, I appreciate that, because some people don't agree with that. So I appreciate that. Now, before we leave, we're going to have to talk about the Thunderbird. And let me just play the devil's advocate for a second. So why are we not finding 20-foot feathers out there, my friend? Why do we not find a Thunderbird that has defecated on somebody's Prius and destroyed it? What's going on? Now, I know that you're not a paranormal guy in relation to interdimensional things and creatures like that, but how are these things able to stay hidden and literally under the radar?
Well, all valid points. It's troubling. There should be physical evidence, or absolutely should be physical evidence if there are, and again, talking about breeding populations. When is an animal classified as critically endangered? When it gets down to less than 1,000 individuals. So to have had a prehistoric bird of some type, and that would be the assumption, still hanging around, there would have to be thousands of them, or maybe hundreds. Even if they lived in remote areas, you would expect to find giant nests and eggshells and feathers and piles of crap on your Prius and stuff like that. There's none of that. So you're right. That's you have to be very objective, and part of being a good investigator of this stuff is seeing both sides and being a little skeptical at times. So I agree with you.
I mean, the sightings of these things have increased a lot lately, especially in the Oregon area, and it's always a surprise. I think it's one of the cryptids or pseudocryptids that just takes you by surprise. Pterodactyl. I'm like, really? It's a very interesting thought process. This is, for those that don't know, this is a massively large bird or winged creature. I would say almost the size of a bus. Am I close? If not bigger?
I don't know if it's quite that big, but some people have described it as being as large as a small Cessna airplane with a 20-foot, 25-foot wingspan. One of the baffling aspects of that mystery is that I receive equal amounts of reports that describe something that is basically a giant condor, vulture, eagle type of bird, raptor with a hooked beak and dark, usually solid dark feathers. And then I get an equal number of sightings and reports of something that sounds like a giant flying lizard or pterosaur, which of course they were a lineage of ancient that were contemporary with the dinosaurs and presumably went extinct 65 million years ago. And on my giant map here in my home, where I've marked all of these flying cryptid reports, pin marked them, the sightings overlap. So you have clusters of flying cryptids, but it's both types in one area. So I don't know. It's fairly baffling what people are seeing, but I can tell you I've interviewed dozens and many dozens of people, eyewitnesses through the years, that claim to have seen these things. Many of them experienced observers, hunters, outdoorsmen, farmers, ranchers, people like that, and they are adamant that they saw these things. So,
yeah. Now, studying the ancient Native American legends, though, it seems extremely likely that they were, witnessing something unbelievable in the skies. And the reason I say that, the idea of a thunderbird makes scientific sense whenever you think that an animal this size probably needs certain wind conditions and certain updrafts to, sustain a flight for a period of time. Especially if we're looking at correlation between other birds that are, even close to this site that are alive today. And that being said, you would think that these creatures would need thunderstorms to ride out these kind of thermals and such. And that makes perfect sense to me as a researcher and as someone that does study the idea of cryptozoology from a very scientific perspective. It seems to me that First Nations people were simply relating what they saw and personified it into the force of nature at work with a very real biological creature involved.
Yeah, very true. And it is worth noting that virtually every Native American culture, from Pacific Northwest to the American Southwest to the Great Plains to the Southeast to New England, you name it, have Thunderbird stories and legends.
Yep. That's right. Absolutely. And so instead of them seeing as the bird that is creating the thunderstorms, they're simply seeing the bird in correlation with the thunderstorms, and that has, be kind of, there's a bit of divinity towards that bird and such. But yeah, to me, it seems like this is an eyewitness account of an unexplained natural phenomenon that just made sense that these birds are seen in conjunction with these thunderstorms. And that was just simply so they could, ride these kind of airwaves to, wherever they needed to go.
Exactly.
But I would like to still find a 20-foot feather. I'm still
that'd be great.
I'm still on the lookout now. I live in western Pennsylvania. I live actually out my window. I can see the Chestnut Ridge, and there's always reports. I'm talking about monthly reports of Thunderbird sightings, and we are not a desolate area whatsoever. I mean, there's Walmarts every 8 miles, so whatever's going on, they're able to stay hidden, even though they're an animal of flight. A lot of it probably is misidentification of turkey vultures or even turkeys themselves, and we have a population now of bald eagles returning. But there's always that tantalizing eyewitness account that this is something far more than what is known to science now.
Yeah. The best candidate, in my opinion, I mean, if you're going to, and again, I never say that any of these things exist 100%. I can't prove it, and
right.
I have the burden of proof. So, but the best candidates for these Thunderbird sightings are the teratorns, which were giant birds that lived during the Ice Age up to about 11,000 years ago. They had one North American species had a wingspan of about 17 or 18 feet across, which is exactly what people are describing. They were related to modern vultures and storks. They were probably nasty, big, ugly, nasty-looking birds, but may have had kind of a vulturian type of look to them. But again, where are they? Where are they living? Where they're seen flying over Pennsylvania on a regular basis, or South Texas, some remote mountain range or something? But even then, you would think that there'd be better evidence. Now, I will say that I think the vast majority of these types of sightings go unreported. And the reason I say that is because obviously you have things like Bigfoot are very much part of the public public culture. People know about Bigfoot. They've heard of it. If someone were to see something like a Bigfoot, they would immediately be able to put it into context and say, that must have been what I saw. And then they might therefore be driven to tell somebody, although most of those people probably remain silent as well. But people who see thunderbirds probably think either A, wow, that's a really friggin' huge bird, and just kind of let it go there, and never consider the fact that maybe they just saw something that's not supposed to exist, but just thought, oh, wow, I've never seen one of those birds, but that thing is huge. Or perhaps it's one of those things where they've never heard of the thunderbird phenomenon, and they're like, wow, I know I saw a bird that's too big to exist, but I'm not going to tell anybody about this because, I don't want to get locked up. So,
yeah.
When people tell me about their sightings, they seem very relieved when I tell them that, oh, no, other people have reported that too,
That's right, yeah. And the interesting thing about going to conferences and meeting people that tell you their stories, I understand now what a priest feels like whenever they hear a confession, because that's what goes on. And I absolutely love to meet people because, if I saw something like this, I would want to have, a shoulder to tell as well, too, because you've got to get this stuff off your chest.
Yeah, they do. And that's one of the most rewarding aspects of doing what we do, I think, is when you're there as a resource for people that have nowhere else to turn.
That's right.
And when they've had an inexplicable, oftentimes life-changing encounter, pretty poignant, profound stuff, and then they kind of unburden themselves on you, and then you're there for them. You can give them that reassurance. Well, hey, I've investigated these things for years. Other people have reported it. You're not the only one, and in some way you can give them a very minuscule amount of closure or potentially some answer.
Sure, they can at least go on with their lives. That's exactly right. Now, talking about the Territorn, one of the things that I find so fascinating is whenever you're talking to these eyewitnesses who have no zoological background whatsoever, they often describe this particular style of tail plumage, which people would say that this Argentinus, whatever it was, magnificence or whatever it was called, this large bird that a lot of people say may have been responsible for the Thunderbird sightings. It seems to be what this bird would have looked like reconstructed in life, and I always find these kind of telltale signs that these eyewitnesses will give to be quite intriguing whenever we get deeper into this mystery, because they're describing a configuration that we don't see very often in flying animals in the neighborhoods in which we live.
Yeah. Well, there you go. It's always those kind of little tantalizing clues that I guess keep us out there looking for these things. Because
that's
you're right.
I mean,
it's when you want to rule the whole thing out and say, "Am I wasting my time here?" These things couldn't exist. But then you consider little aspects like that. Isn't that curious?
That's right. That's right.
I tell you, I was in southern Jersey, and I'm hanging out at a friend's house, and I went outside, and on the roof of one of the little houses around there was a ginormous blackbird there, and I'm like, oh, look, Thunderbird, I've never seen anything like it. But what it turns out to be is the turkey vulture. And if you would see this up close, and I don't know if any of the audience has, but what they do is they like to stand in the sun, and they spread their wings fully out. And their wingspan is at least 6 feet wide. It's noticeable. It's a big, massive bird. Then, of course, I found out that they do this because the sun rays, they blow anything with roadkill or whatever they're eating. They literally will clean their wings with the sun rays, I guess, that's going through it. But if you would see this and not know that they do exist, that's a Thunderbird right off the bat. And you can't. So I literally had to bring people out like, you got to see this bird. You got to see this bird. And no one knew what the heck it was. I guess we were just city folk. But, I mean, if I saw this thing flying over my head, it would be almost like looking like a small Cessna.
That's right. That's the way your mind would put it together, because you can't relate in any other way. This is something out of the ordinary that you yourself has never witnessed before. So, of course, your mind is going to deal with it differently than somebody that was attuned to these kind of birds living in a particular environment. And that's the kind of thing that we have to look at as researchers. People could be seeing something that is very common, but it is completely alien to them, so their mind will make it an alien creature, because they can't put it into any other kind of schema, but then an animal that, shouldn't be there when actually, that's their domain. But it's interesting, Bryan, that you did bring up about New Jersey, because whenever I'm digging deeper into the idea of the Jersey Devil, I think it has very common avian features to it that a lot of people really don't discuss. What are your feelings on the Jersey Devil there, Ken?
Well, the Jersey Devil, based on the original description, seems to be kind of a chimera of different animal parts. It is typically described as being about 3 to 5 feet tall, with a kangaroo-shaped body, a long muzzle, and bat-like wings, a long tail with kind of a fork on the end. I guess that's the devil part. Some people have described it as having horns or glowing red eyes. So that doesn't really fit neatly within the paradigm of natural history, unless people are kind of embellishing some of those traits or whatever. But the wings are notable, and the biggest flap, which occurred during January of 1909, when for several weeks, it was reported jumping from rooftop to rooftop, and so for flying overhead, so it seemed to be a winged animal of sorts. But yeah, it's not one of those cryptids that really has a lot of, there's not a lot in terms of eyewitness sightings or tangible evidence. There are titillizing sightings here and there, but
it doesn't have the pedigree we need, does it?
Not really. But again, if you want to put it in your Goblin universe, it could be something that's maybe not this earth, but does manifest from time to time in that area.
Do you think that there's a correlation from going from the Mothman sightings, that type of cryptid being in, covering a larger area, and maybe some people it went up to southern Jersey or the Pine Barrens, and maybe they're seeing what they really were seeing as Mothman, because you get the glowing eyes, the wings. There seems like to be a lot of similarity between the two in many ways. I mean, of course, this is kind of like a flying horse, something you'd probably see out of like a Dungeons and Dragons type of thing. But I always thought there was a possible correlation that the Mothman was traveling in multiple areas, that cryptid.
Well, possibly. And in my book, Encounters with Flying Humanoids, Mothman, Man-Birds, Gargoyles, and Other Winged Beasts, I basically included the Jersey Devil. It was mostly about Mothman and similar flying humanoids around the world, but I included cases of Jersey Devil and some other kind of gargoyle-type creatures because it seems to be a potentially related phenomenon. I don't know if you can say that there's one type, but there is a quote-unquote Mothman or a Jersey Devil. There seem to be a multitude of different physical descriptions of anomalous flying creatures, sometimes humanoid, sometimes bearing the characteristics of other animals, but always with wings and oftentimes with glowing red eyes. They vanish as quickly as they appear. They seem to want to chase and terrify people, but never actually physically attack anybody. They've been seen in areas where there are other kind of anomalous events and UFO activity and things like that. So it seems to be a global phenomenon, and it seems to have dated back at least thousands of years. But I don't know if you can use the name Mothman and the physical description of Mothman to cover all of those sightings.
Yeah, I mean, it would be very interesting. Have you ever done any research with some of the indigenous peoples in the area and see what their legends is in coordination with the sightings of Mothman or the Jersey Devil? Because a lot of times there's a lot of insight that can be gathered from these groups.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not necessarily as much fable as it is the old talking technique of handing down your history orally, and there could be some correlations to Native American history versus local folklore.
Absolutely. Admittedly, I haven't in those cases. I do oftentimes in other cases. But I do remember now that there was another researcher who found in a museum in New England somewhere, he found a little figurine. It was an centuries-old figurine of something that looked just like the Mothman reports. And I don't have the better information than that in front of me, but I remember seeing the article and reading it and looking at the little figurine and saying, "Yep, looks just like the friggin' Mothman image that everybody comes to mind. The giant eye, no head, two giant eyes, and kind of the bat-like wings."
I remember the.
So perhaps
it's an interesting cryptid, and I always go to when they talk Jersey Devil to that video they had of the night shot, the night camera, with something that looked like literally looked like a I don't know, goblin with wings, and it looked like a combination of the flying monkeys from The Wizard of Oz to like the devil's head on it. But it's very interesting. We should take a trip down there, Ron. Go to the Pine Barrens.
You know what? There are some things that I will do, and there's some things that I will not do. I am one of these guys that I love to be out in the woods, but I don't like to be out of the woods after dark. I'm just one of these kind of crazy people that I don't want to end up dead. You call me old-fashioned.
Why not?
But I do want to get down to the Pine Barrens. I've got to get down there sometime. Now, Ken, have you done a lot of work in the Pine Barrens at all?
No, not at all. Never been there, unfortunately.
Yeah, either have I.
I have a friend who lives in the area, and he's invited me to come stay with him and do research, but just haven't made it down there, or up there, I should say.
That's right. It's in sight of Atlantic City, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe if you guys go out in the woods, I'll just go do some gambling or something like that. That would be cool.
I'll tell you what. We've done some investigations. We had that Bigfoot encounter. Right now, we're going to be investigating something with the Dogman related sightings in New York State. Very local, pretty much close to where I was tonight, Ron, with the family.
Oh, right.
So, but that's one cryptid I definitely don't want to meet in the woods or in person. I'd like to see it from afar, but this is all around. Killing machine. The werewolf Dogman. Let's go back to let's go full circle as we have about 6 minutes left. But I mean, that's a massive creature, and the sightings go from this being reported at 8 feet tall upwards of, I've heard 15 feet, which it's just kind of hard to fathom, a 15-foot cryptid. But
yeah, hard to hide when you're 15 feet tall. No doubt.
Those true giants out there in the Pacific Northwest, some reports going as tall as 20 feet. Ken, there has to be a biological termination on how big an animal gets, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And the thing about the humanoid form, as you exponentially increase the height, the mass has to increase at a pretty staggering rate. And I forget the equation but I recently did commentary for a show where I discussed that because they wanted to talk about some of these allegations of 15 to 50-foot giant humanoids. Excuse me. And the thing is that it would put so much weight and pressure on our lower limbs. We're not built to carry that much weight. We're not built to be that big. We're not. Our design as bipeds. We're not. So yeah, I don't think that's. I think the tallest human that ever lived was Robert Wadlow. He was almost 9 feet tall, 8'11" or something like that. That's a pretty darn big human. And for those proponents of Gigantopithecus being a hominid and walking upright, perhaps the estimations of Gigantopithecus about 10 feet tall. Mm-hmm. So I would say 8, 9, 10 feet tall would be the very, very tallest that you could have a fully functional human form.
Very cool, very cool. Now, what about birds? What are we talking about birds? Because I know that, even something that has a great wingspan has a very small body type because it takes a lot to lift, something up off the ground.
Well, they're very lightweight because birds have hollow bones, so did pterosaurs. So they're a very light design. Even the you mentioned Argentavis earlier, the largest known bird ever weighed 100, maybe 150 pounds, and we're talking about something with like a 26-foot wingspan, and maybe stood like 5 feet tall. I don't remember the weight on the largest pterosaurs were like Quetzalcoatlus, and some of the pterodactyls. They had maybe a 40-foot wingspan. They probably didn't weigh that much, maybe about the same, 150 pounds. So there is physics involved there. And it's on that note, just one more comment, because on average, a large predatory bird like an eagle can pick up at the most half of its body weight. And so, if you've got a 150-pound bird or pterosaur, pterodactyl, it's not going to be able to carry a human away, only maybe a very small human like a child.
Right.
But probably not a full-grown adult. So, therefore, a lot of the legends and stories of these thunderbirds carrying people away, probably not true. But who knows?
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to carry ourselves away. We're literally out of time.
But you know what, Ken? We still got to find out where your books are
yes,
at.
Please.
Where we can find a copy of the DVD for the Wolfman. And again, before we sign off here, absolute pleasure and an honor to have you on our Halloween show.
Yes.
Well, guys, thank you for having me on, guys. I had a great time. Fascinating discussion. You guys came up with some great points and questions. My books are all available online, usually at Amazon or any other online book retailer. Just type in Ken Gerhard and you can usually find those. My newest one is called A Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts. It covers a pretty diverse range of subjects. Very proud of that one. And also I have a website, kengerhard.com, and also a Facebook fan page, Ken Gerhard Cryptozoologist. And people are welcome to reach out to me if they have any sightings or experiences with anything strange, or if they just want to ask me a question or say hi.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. I've only shared the room with you one time in my entire career, but it was a complete honor to do it. Honor to have you on the phone with us again here tonight, and I'm looking forward. Hopefully, we'll get together sometime in the near future. Maybe I'll run into you at a conference sometime in 2018.
I hope so, Ron, and it was an honor being on your show, gentlemen. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for coming on. It was actually a very amazing episode. We, a lot of education being done on the Goblin Universe tonight. We're not just entertainment; we're education as well. But
that's right.
We've got about a minute.
Hey, I'm going to sign off, or we'll get fired, man. For Inside the Goblin Universe, I am one of your hosts. I'm Ronald Murphy.
I'm Bryan Bowden.
And until next time, pleasant dreams.
Trick or treat.
The concept of shape-shifting is ingrained in our psyche, lurking in our collective unconscious and stalking our nightmares. Crypto guru Ronald Murphy tracks the Dogman through history, beginning with the hunt in the dim beginnings of the human race, and follows the tenuous tracks of the werewolf to the modern age. This compelling study seeks the monster in all of us, but more importantly shows the readers the man behind the wolf. On Dogman is available on Amazon.com.